So, imagine a master of battlefield strategy.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Like an emperor who personally commanded the slaughter of entire invading armies. A guy who wrote the definitive medieval textbook on, guerrilla warfare and surviving ambushes.
Right, a true military genius.
Exactly. Now imagine that same man at the absolute height of his imperial power being murdered in his sleep by his own family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and his body is just tossed out a window into the freezing snow.
That's brutal.
It is wild. But hold that image, because centuries later, the specific street named in honor of this terrifying warrior would become the site of a miraculous, mathematically impossible survival story during a devastating earthquake.
Talk about a shift in tone.
Right. And as if history has a sense of humor, that exact same street would eventually house the most legendary, smoke-filled, underground rock and roll bar in the country for 40 years.
It really is a street of extremes.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. But before we step onto that street, there is an important required acknowledgement we need to make to you, our listener.
Yes, very important.
We want to explicitly state that this exploration is part of the podcast project. The street has its own story. Or, in Greek, O dromos ekiti dikitou historia. It is provided by the podcaster Giannis Stefanidis.
And we are absolutely thrilled to be unpacking the incredible source material he's curated for us today.
It's such a remarkable premise for an exploration, We spend so much time looking at history as a timeline.
Right, moving horizontally from year to year.
Exactly. But this project forces us to look at history vertically. We are taking a single geographic line, one specific street, and drilling straight down through the bedrock of time.
I love that framing.
So I want you to transport yourself right now. Picture yourself standing in the very heart of Thessaloniki, Greece.
Okay.
You're walking down Nikiforos Phokas Street. It is this narrow, incredibly vibrant corridor.
Right. It starts right in the middle of the dense, noisy city center.
Yeah, and it acts almost like a physical funnel. It draws you down past these residential buildings and small shop fronts, and it just elegantly spills out onto Nikis Avenue, right at the edge of the water.
You can almost smell the exhaust of city traffic mixing with the heavy sea salt from the Thermaic Gulf.
And the sharp scent of espresso from the corner cafes. It's so visceral.
The geography of the street is inherently transitional. I mean, it connects the deep urban interior with the vast openness of the sea. But what we are going to see today is that it's not just a spatial transition. It is a temporal one. You are literally walking over layers of trauma, triumph, and sheer chance.
There's this term art historians use, pentimenti.
Oh, right. When a painter paints over an older canvas.
Exactly. And over time, the new paint fades just enough that you can see the brushstrokes of the old painting bleeding through to the surface.
That is a perfect analogy.
Walking down Nikiforos Phokas is like walking across urban pentimenti. The modern asphalt is just, a thin veneer. If you know where to look, the ancient blood, the fallen concrete, and the echoes of Nick Cave music are all bleeding right through.
It's like scrolling through a Wikipedia page where every single hyperlink opens up a completely contrasting era of human history.
Exactly. And to really understand the canvas, we have to start with the man whose name is literally bolted to the street signs, Emperor Nikiforos II Phokas.
The man himself.
Who exactly is this guy? And what was he doing in the 10th century to earn a permanent place in the city's geography?
Well, to understand Nikiforos II Phokas, you first have to understand the world he was born into in 912 AD.
Okay, set the scene.
He was born in Cappadocia, right in the heart of Asia Minor, into a family known as the Phocades. And we really cannot overstate their influence.
They were a big deal.
Massive. From the 5th century all the way into the 11th century, the Phocades were the defining military aristocracy of the Byzantine Empire.
So they basically ran the military.
Pretty much. His father, Bardas Phokas, was a highly decorated general. His brother Leo was a legendary military commander. Nikiforos wasn't just trained for war, he was genetically and culturally engineered for it.
Wow.
The Phocades owned massive estates. They commanded absolute loyalty from their regional troops, and they were the shield that protected the empire's eastern borders.
So he is effectively born into a military dynasty that rivals the imperial family itself in terms of raw, boots-on-the-ground power.
Oh, without a doubt.
And he doesn't just rest on the family name either. The sources point out that by 917 AD, when he is essentially still a kid, he is already fighting at the Battle of Achelous.
Right, and the Battle of Achelous was one of the bloodiest, most catastrophic clashes in Byzantine history. They fought against the Bulgarian Empire.
That's Sounds intense for a kid.
Extremely.
Yeah.
Experiencing that level of visceral, close-quarters combat at such a formative age really forged his understanding of warfare.
It wasn't abstract to him.
Not at all. He knew the smell of it, the sheer mechanical brutality of shield walls breaking and cavalry charges. His competence was so terrifyingly apparent that his rise through the ranks was just unstoppable.
I bet.
By 941 AD, he was appointed as a regional military governor. But the true pivot point of his career came in 945 AD.
What happened then?
The sitting emperor promoted him to domesticos of the schools.
Okay, I have to stop you there. That title always trips me up.
I know, it sounds funny to modern ears.
Domesticos of the schools sounds like he's the headmaster of an academy making sure the imperial children are doing their Latin homework.
Yeah, it is a deceptively bureaucratic title for a violently powerful job.
Right.
The schools originally referred to elite guard units in late antiquity. But by the 10th century, the domesticos of the schools was the commander-in-chief of the Byzantine field army.
Oh, wow. So he's the top general.
Specifically, Phokas was given command of the East. He was the supreme military leader holding the line against the expanding Arab caliphates. It's the absolute highest military rank a human being could hold without actually wearing the purple imperial crown.
And he takes that immense power and immediately goes on the offensive.
He doesn't waste any time.
The sources highlight 961 AD as his defining triumph. This is the liberation of Crete, specifically the siege of a fortress city called Chandax, which we know today as Heraklion.
Yes.
Why was Crete such a massive deal that it defines his legacy?
Because for 134 years prior to that campaign, the island of Crete had been under Arab control, functioning essentially as a heavily fortified pirate kingdom.
A pirate kingdom? That sounds like a nightmare.
It was. The Emirate of Crete had turned the Mediterranean into a nightmare for Byzantine shipping. They raided coastal cities, disrupted supply lines, and undermined the economic stability of the entire region.
So they were a constant thorn in the empire's side.
It's exactly. The Byzantine Empire had launched multiple massive, expensive expeditions to retake the island over the decades, and every single one had ended in humiliating disaster.
Until Nikiforos Phokas shows up.
Right. And he doesn't just arrive with boats. He arrives with a level of logistical and tactical precision that the emirate just wasn't prepared for.
How did he do it?
He engineers a brutal, grinding siege of Chandax. Siege warfare in the 10th century was a horrific war of attrition, starvation, disease, and constant bombardment.
Just grueling.
On March 7th, 961 AD, the city finally fell. He completely dismantled the emirate. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a geopolitical earthquake.
Wow.
It restored Byzantine naval dominance across the Aegean and the eastern Mediterranean overnight. And it was the ruthless efficiency of this campaign that earned him a title that honestly sounds like a myth.
I know exactly what you're talking about, the pale death of the Saracens.
It's so evocative.
I mean, if you are writing a dark fantasy novel, you cannot come up with a more intimidating nickname.
No, you really can't.
And he completely leans into it. He doesn't go back to Constantinople to rest. He pivots his entire military machine east. By 965 AD, he takes Tarsus, he takes Mopsuestia, and he just keeps grinding his way into Syria.
He was relentless.
He reaches the city of Aleppo and absolutely sacks it, dealing a fatal blow to the Hamdanid dynasty.
Let's contextualize the Hamdanids for a moment because it really highlights what Phokas was up against.
Sure. Who were they?
The Hamdanid dynasty was a powerful Shia Muslim Arab dynasty that dominated northern Syria and parts of Iraq. They were fierce, sophisticated, and deeply entrenched.
So not an easy target.
No, they were the primary geopolitical rivals on the eastern frontier. By shattering their power base in Aleppo, Phokas didn't just win a battle. He fundamentally destabilized the enemy's entire regional power structure. He was an unstoppable force.
But the sources also paint a picture of a man who is deeply, fundamentally contradictory.
He was a very complex figure.
In 963 AD, the sitting emperor Romanus II dies unexpectedly. Phokas, who has the absolute loyalty of the army, marches on Constantinople, and the patriarch crowns him emperor.
He reaches the absolute pinnacle.
He does. He marries the widow of Romanus II, the Empress Theophano, which brilliantly legitimizes his claim to the throne. He has absolute power, unimaginable wealth, and a royal wife.
You'd expect a man in this position to indulge, right?
Exactly. To build golden palaces and throw legendary banquets.
But instead, he turns the imperial palace into a monastery.
It's so weird.
The dichotomy of Nikiforos Phokas is perhaps his most fascinating trait. The man who ordered the sack of cities and the execution of thousands of prisoners practiced a form of extreme, punishing personal asceticism.
How extreme are we talking?
Well, the historical accounts tell us he refused to sleep in an imperial bed. He slept on the floor, on a coarse animal skin.
You're kidding.
No, and he wore hair shirts. He engaged in prolonged, grueling fasts that physically weakened him.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the psychology here. Is this political theater? Like, is he trying to show the common people how pious he is? Or was this genuine religious fervor?
It appears to have been entirely genuine, honestly bordering on obsessive. He was deeply under the spiritual influence of his confessor, Saint Athanasius the Athenite.
Okay.
Phokas heavily financed and supported Athanasius in the founding of the Great Lavra, the first major monastery on Mount Athos.
Which is still a massive center of Orthodox monasticism today, right?
Exactly. Phokas actually expressed a desire to abdicate the throne and become a monk. But Athanasius allegedly convinced him that his divine duty was to wield the sword for the empire. He saw himself as a holy instrument.
But that holiness stopped at his own skin. I mean, he might have been starving himself, but he certainly wasn't charitable to the empire's economy. The sources mention his economic policies were incredibly harsh.
Well, holy wars on multiple fronts are astronomically expensive.
That makes sense.
You have to feed, equip, and pay tens of thousands of professional soldiers, maintain massive naval fleets, and build siege engines.
So how did he pay for it all?
To finance this, Phokas implemented brutal fiscal policies. He significantly raised taxes across the board. Furthermore, he engaged in currency devaluation.
Let's break that down, because a currency devaluation sounds like a dry textbook term, but it has real human consequences. How did he actually do it?
In the Byzantine system, the standard gold coin was the nomisma, which was famous for its high, stable gold purity.
Right.
Phokas introduced a new, lighter coin called the tetarteron. He mandated that taxes owed to the state had to be paid in the old, heavy, full-weight gold coins.
Okay, I see where this is going.
However, when the state paid its debts, or when it paid soldiers or vendors, it used the new, lighter tartaron.
Ah, so he essentially instituted a hidden tax. He's taking in pure value and paying out diluted value and just pocketing the difference to fund his military machine.
Exactly. And it immediately triggered inflation. The cost of basic goods skyrocketed.
That must have been devastating for normal people.
The working class and the peasantry suffered immensely. On top of this, he slashed state subsidies and limited the ability of the church and monasteries to acquire new land, which alienated the clergy.
So he's making enemies everywhere.
He was squeezing every drop of wealth out of the civilian sector to feed the military. He was revered by his soldiers, but he was deeply despised by the common people and the civilian aristocracy in the capital.
He wasn't just a brute force commander, though. The source material emphasizes his intellectual contributions. He didn't just fight, he analyzed fighting.
Yes, he is a foundational figure in medieval military theory.
He wrote military treatises, right?
He authored a manual called the Precepta Militaria, which translates roughly to the presentation and composition on strategy.
What kind of stuff did it cover?
It is a hyper-detailed, incredibly pragmatic manual on the art of war in the 10th century. It breaks down infantry formations, cavalry charges, camp fortifications.
Wow.
But the work that truly reveals his genius is a treatise called De Vellatatione Bellica.
Which translates to on skirmishing.
Yes, or, more accurately, on defensive, asymmetric guerrilla warfare.
Guerrilla warfare? That's surprising.
You have to remember, the eastern border of the Byzantine Empire was heavily mountainous. The Taurus Mountains. Arab raiding parties would cross these mountain passes, strike Byzantine farming communities, loot, and try to escape back through the passes before the main Byzantine field army could mobilize.
So Phokas wrote the definitive guide on how to neutralize this. So how did it work? Because usually when we think of emperors in war, we think of massive armies lining up in fields, not guerrilla tactics.
De Vellatatione Bellica instructs Byzantine border commanders to avoid pitched battles when outmanned. Instead, Phokas details how to shadow the invading army using local militia.
Oh, that's smart.
How to poison their watering holes. How to use light cavalry to pick off their foraging parties, starving the main invading force.
So it's all about harassment.
And crucially, he details the art of the ambush. He explains exactly how to wait until the enemy is finished looting and is weighed down by plunder, and then attack them in the narrow mountain passes on their way home.
Using the high ground to trap them.
Yes. He understood warfare not as a clash of brute strength, but as an intricate psychological puzzle of terrain, supply lines, and human exhaustion.
Which makes the end of his life an absolute masterpiece of tragic irony.
It really is.
Here's a man who literally wrote the book on how to anticipate ambushes, a man whose entire mental architecture is built around anticipating betrayal, securing the perimeter, and understanding the psychology of an enemy.
And yet,
And yet he is assassinated in his own bedroom.
on the dawn of December 11th, 969 AD.
The details of this assassination are staggering. A conspiracy is formed led by two people who should have been his closest allies, right?
Yes, his own nephew, John Simiskis, who is a brilliant general in his own right, and Phokas' own wife, the Empress Theophano.
Talk about betrayal.
They orchestrate a plot to smuggle assassins into the imperial palace. They sneak into the royal quarters in the dead of night.
And when they enter his room, they don't find him in the royal bed.
No, they find him sleeping on the floor, on his animal skin.
And they murder him right there.
They do. And then in a final, visceral act of political theater, they throw his severed head and his bloody body out the window into the winter snow.
Just to prove to the palace guard that the emperor is actually dead.
The complete collapse of a titan.
But hold on, I have to stop here and ask the obvious question. How does a man like this get caught off guard so completely?
It
makes no sense to me that a master of terrain and intelligence gathering couldn't sense the shifting terrain in his own household. How does an emperor with absolute military authority get outmaneuvered by his wife and his nephew?
It perfectly illustrates the paradox of authoritarian isolation.
What do you mean?
The very traits that made him an invincible general and a devout ascetic, his extreme, uncompromising nature, are precisely the traits that isolated him politically.
Ah, I see.
When you devalue the currency, you create enemies in the marketplace. When you alienate the civilian aristocracy, you lose your political spies in the capital.
And on a personal level.
More intimately, his extreme asceticism meant he was physically and emotionally detached from the social fabric of his own palace. He wasn't participating in the banquets, the gossip, the subtle social maneuvering where plots are typically uncovered.
He lived like a monk in a fortress of his own making.
Entirely disconnected from the human desires and ambitions of his wife and his nephew.
He secured the borders of the empire, but he left the door to his own bedroom wide open.
Precisely. His profound isolation is perfectly captured in the epitaph that was supposedly carved onto his tomb.
What did it say?
You conquered everything except one woman.
Wow. That is a haunting summary.
He could shatter the Hamdanid dynasty, but he couldn't navigate the intricate, intimate politics of his own marriage.
It's almost Shakespearean.
Interestingly, despite his brutal end and his harsh policies, the Orthodox Church later recognized his deep piety, and he is actually revered as a saint.
Wait, really?
Yes, commemorated on December 11th, the anniversary of his murder.
So we have this towering, contradictory, bloody, historical figure. But what does any of this have to do with the street?
The street.
Why did the modern city of Thessaloniki decide to name this very specific, narrow corridor of asphalt after an emperor who was born in Cappadocia and murdered in Constantinople?
To understand the connection, we have to look away from the man and look at the ground beneath the street.
Okay, down to the pavement.
We have to connect the life's mission of Nikiforos Phokas, which was neutralizing the Arab threat, to the specific historical trauma absorbed by this exact patch of soil.
Because this street has been vital since the dawn of the city. The sources lay out the geography perfectly.
Let's trace it.
The area we are talking about, bordered by modern-day Dimitriou Gunari, Pavloumela, Nikiforos Phokas, and Nekis Avenue, was the original commercial port of the city.
Right. We are talking ancient Macedonian times, dating all the way back to the city's founding by Cassander in 315 or 316 BC.
A city's port is like its lung.
It is where oxygen, in the form of trade, culture, and wealth, enters the urban body. During the Roman era, this precise port area was incorporated into the massive palace complex of Emperor Galerius.
So it's always been important.
For over 1,000 years, the ground beneath Nikiforos Phokas Street was the economic and imperial gateway of Thessaloniki. It was the place of greatest wealth, but by definition, a port is also a city's point of greatest vulnerability.
Which brings us to the darkest chapter in the city's medieval history, the year 904 AD.
The sack of Thessaloniki.
And the architect of this nightmare wasn't some foreign invader who didn't understand the city. It was a man named Leo of Tripoli.
A fascinating figure.
And the cruelest detail of all is that Leo was a Greek renegade. He was born a Christian within the empire, captured, converted to Islam, and rose to command a massive Arab fleet.
So he knew exactly how Byzantine defenses worked.
He weaponized his intimate knowledge of the empire against it. In 904 AD, Leo bypassed the heavy fortifications of the city and directed his fleet straight into the heart of the port.
The exact area where Nikiforos Phokas Street lies today.
The siege was swift, and the devastation was absolute. The Byzantine accounts of the event are just harrowing. The city's defenses crumbled, and the Arab forces poured into the streets.
The human cost detailed in the sources is difficult to even process. They didn't just loot the wealth.
No, they took an estimated 22,000 residents captive.
22,000 human beings, chained, loaded onto the fleet, and sold into slavery across the Mediterranean.
It's a demographic rupture, a cultural amputation.
There was a trauma that left a permanent psychological scar on the collective memory of the city. The threat from the sea, the Arab threat, had manifested in the most horrific way imaginable right on the docks of that ancient port.
And that is why the naming of this street is so incredibly profound.
It's an act of poetic vengeance, really.
Or at least historical vindication. The city takes this specific soil, the very ground that was stained with the blood of 904 AD, the exact spot where 22,000 citizens were dragged away, and they name it after Nikiforos Phokas.
The pale death of the Saracens.
Exactly. They name the site of their deepest trauma after the man who dedicated his entire existence to systematically dismantling the military capacity of the people who inflicted that trauma.
It functions almost like a magical ward, you know? A protective spell woven right into the city grid.
It is a brilliant way of looking at it. By naming the street Nikiforos Phokas, the city overlays the nightmare of 904 AD with the ultimate triumph of 961 AD.
It is a profound statement of survival. And survival, adaptation, and layering are the defining themes of this neighborhood.
Because the street didn't just freeze as a Byzantine monument. It continued to evolve, absorbing new waves of history.
The sources explicitly mention the massive transformation in 1923.
The population exchange between Greece and Turkey following the Greco-Turkish War.
This was another massive demographic upheaval, but this time an influx. Refugees from Asia Minor flooded into Thessaloniki.
Bringing their own culture with them.
They brought their own architectural sensibilities and their own trades. The older Ottoman-era elements of the neighborhood began to recede or were heavily repurposed.
So the physical and social fabric of Nikiforos Phokas Street was rewritten again.
Layering a modern, refugee-infused Greek identity right over the Byzantine port.
It's an incredible macroscopic view of history. Empires clashing, armadas sacking ports, global treaties forcing millions of people to migrate.
It is.
But the source material for this deep dive does something absolutely brilliant here. It forces us to stop looking at the tectonic plates of global geopolitics and suddenly zooms in on a literal, terrifying tectonic shift.
We are moving from the sweeping centuries of history to one very specific, humid summer night.
June 20th, 1978, the Thessaloniki earthquake.
A 6.5 magnitude quake that shattered the city.
But we aren't looking at the city as a whole. The sources give us this hyper-intimate, microscopic view of one exact address on Nikiforos Phokas Street, which was also known locally as Epidromio.
We are looking at a single 8-story apartment building.
And we are zooming in even further to the 4th floor. This was the residence of the Baltas and Lascaretas families.
I want to walk through this story incredibly methodically because the chain of events here defies logic.
It really does. It is a study in the terrifying invisible weight of mundane choices.
Let's establish the baseline. The apartment on the 4th floor originally belonged to the great-grandparents, Stavros and Maria Lascaretas.
Fortunately, they had passed away naturally several years prior, in 1969 and 1975.
The family explicitly notes that given their advanced age and physical frailty, the sheer shock of what was to come would have been unsurvivable.
So by the summer of 1978, the apartment is occupied by their daughter, a woman named Stella.
She lives there with her husband, Ilias Mousios, and their 2 adult children, Evangelia and Takis.
4 people living in a concrete box suspended 4 stories above Nikiforos Phokas Street.
Now, let us examine the timeline of that specific evening and watch how chance actively dismantles probability.
Let's start with the daughter, Evangelia.
Evangelia is a young mother. She recently had a baby boy named Nikos. But she's a teacher, and she had just received a bureaucratic assignment to teach in Thessaloniki,
which is a town on the completely opposite side of the Greek mainland.
Because of this entirely administrative decision made by a faceless ministry, Evangelia is not in the apartment.
Okay.
Furthermore, because she is a working mother in a new town, her mother, Stella, travels to Thessaloniki to help care for the newborn.
Boom. A bureaucratic rubber stamp and the basic logistics of childcare mean that 2 of the 4 permanent residents are removed from the geographical danger zone entirely. Stella and Evangelia are hundreds of miles away.
That leaves the father, Ilias, and the son, Takis, in the apartment on the evening of June 20th.
Right.
Now, their plan for the night was very simple. The grandfather, Georgos Leskaridis, who lived just a short walk away on Dimitriou Gonari Street, was scheduled to come over.
Because it's the 1978 World Cup.
Exactly.
Grandfather Georgos is supposed to walk over to the apartment on Nikiforos Phokas, sit in the living room with his son-in-law and his grandson, and watch a soccer game on TV. It is the most spectacularly normal summer evening you can imagine.
But the execution of that plan hinged on a completely separate household dynamic.
How so?
Grandfather Georgos lived with his wife and his other daughter, Maria. Maria was deeply invested in a specific Greek television drama series that aired in the evenings.
And this is 1978. There are no smartphones, no streaming services. Households typically had one television set.
Right. If Maria is watching her drama series, Grandfather Georgos cannot watch the World Cup.
Yeah.
That is the entire reason he usually goes to Ilias's apartment.
Exactly. The allocation of screen time dictated his physical movement.
However, on this specific night, Maria received an invitation.
An invitation.
She was invited to a social gathering, a party hosted by the family who would later become her child's godparents, located across the city near Marshy Street.
Maria decides she wants to go to the party. She gets dressed, she leaves her house, and in doing so, she leaves the television set available.
Which fundamentally alters the trajectory of the night. Grandfather Georgos realizes he doesn't need to leave his home. He picks up the telephone, calls the apartment on Nikiforos Phokas, and tells Ilias and Takis, Maria went out. The TV is mine tonight. I'm going to stay right here and watch the game.
It's just, I can't get over the physics of it. It's not just a butterfly flapping its wings. It's structural load-bearing chance.
It is.
A young woman's desire to go drink wine with her friends physically shifts the location of an elderly man across the city, and that phone call acts as the final catalyst.
Because Grandfather Georgos canceled his visit, the social gravity holding Ilias and Takis in the apartment suddenly vanished. There was no guest to entertain.
Right.
They felt restless. They decided there was no reason to stay indoors on a summer night.
Takasis decides to go to a popular spot called Zartkakos. His father, Ilias, decides to go to an ozeri called Hermes, which was located under the famous Red House building at Hagia Sophia.
They walk out the door. They lock it behind them. The apartment is completely, utterly empty.
And then the earth fractures.
The 6.5 magnitude earthquake strikes Thessaloniki.
The violent shaking fundamentally compromises the structural integrity of the building on Nikiforos Phokas.
It completely collapses. 8 stories of concrete, steel, and human belongings pancake into a massive, unrecognizable mountain of rubble. It falls straight down into the street.
The sensory experience of that night across the city was apocalyptic. Total blackout, the deafening roar of falling buildings screaming, thick clouds of concrete dust choking the air.
And communication networks immediately failed. There were no cell phones to check in on loved ones.
The source material describes the dawn breaking over the city. Ilias and Takis, covered in dust, wandering through this chaotic, unrecognizable urban landscape, desperately trying to get back to their street.
They converge on the site of their building, and they are confronted with the tomb of concrete.
And the most heart-stopping part of the account is that until the exact moment they locked eyes by the ruins, neither man knew if the other had decided to go home early.
They fall into each other's arms, sobbing.
They are standing beside hundreds of tons of pulverized concrete that by all laws of statistical probability should have crushed them.
We often view the architecture of a city as permanent and unyielding. We trust the concrete.
But this story forces us to realize that human survival in an urban space isn't just about structural engineering. It is a precarious matrix of billion-to-1 odds.
Think about the fragility of the threads.
Yeah, I mean, if Evangelia had been assigned to a school in Thessaloniki, if Maria had felt slightly tired and decided to skip the party to watch her soap opera,
If Takis had said, let's just stay in and listen to the radio.
if one single human impulse had shifted by an inch, that lineage ends in the rubble. The writer of the source material we are reading today, Jurek Baltas, only exists to write the story because his mother, Maria, wanted to go to a party.
It is a profoundly humbling realization. Every street you walk down is paved over these invisible near misses.
It really is.
But what is equally remarkable about human nature and about cities is the sheer velocity of recovery. The rubble is cleared, the grief is processed, and life aggressively reasserts itself.
Which brings us to the next layer of the pentimenti, Because, incredibly, just 2 years after that street was choked with concrete dust and trauma, a new door opens on Nikiforos Phokas.
And behind that door is an explosion of life, music, and an entirely new, radical energy.
We transition from a street defined by survival to a street that became the pulsing, chaotic heart of Thessaloniki's alternative youth culture for the next 40 years.
It is time to talk about Flou.
Number 9, Nikiforos Phokas Street.
To call Flou a bar feels like a massive disservice.
I agree. According to the sources, from the moment it opened in the fall of 1980, it operated as a cultural institution.
The founders were Michalis Kartachakis, Dimitris Phokas, and Giorgos Zikas, and the physical architecture of the space perfectly mirrored its underground philosophy.
This wasn't a purpose-built commercial venue with huge glass windows inviting the public in?
No, it was originally a residential space. In its earliest iteration, it didn't even possess a direct entrance from the street.
Wait, how did you get in?
Patrons had to navigate through the main entryway of the apartment building to access it. This architectural quirk instantly imbued the space with the psychology of a speakeasy.
It wasn't a place you casually stumbled into.
It was a destination you had to know about. You had to be initiated.
And the philosophy behind the bar was explicitly anti-establishment, or more accurately, anti-label.
Right. They named it Flou, which was heavily inspired by a groundbreaking, highly influential album by the Greek rock artist Dionysus Savvopoulos.
The word implies something blurry, out of focus, or undefinable.
Kartachakis was very vocal about his intent. He wanted a sanctuary with no definitions, a space completely devoid of the rigid social categorizations that often dictate nightlife.
And the aesthetic execution of that philosophy was brilliant because it was entirely organic. They didn't hire a high-end interior designer to synthesize a vibe.
No, they built the atmosphere by scavenging the history of the city itself.
The defining visual feature of Flou were these massive, incredibly ornate wooden mirrors. They didn't buy them from a catalog. They salvaged them from the historic Hotel Mediterranean.
And here is where the layers of the street fold in on themselves again.
The Hotel Mediterranean was an iconic luxury hotel on the waterfront that was severely, irreparably damaged during the exact same 1978 earthquake we just talked about. It was eventually slated for demolition.
Precisely. So the founders of Flou are literally venturing into the ruins of the old fallen city, extracting pieces of its shattered elegance and installing them into this new underground sanctuary.
It is a literal architectural resurrection.
They hunted through flea markets for antique lamps. They repurposed old, discarded wooden cafe chairs.
Dimitris Phokas' wife, Alika, hand-designed the custom tables. And the most remarkable thing is that for 40 years, they refused to change it.
They didn't chase trends.
The decor remained perfectly static. And in the beginning, it wasn't just whiskey and smoke. The sources note they served what were considered advanced salads for 1980s Greece, crepes, and a legendary, highly sought-after dessert known as Roxani's cake.
It was a holistic environment designed to nourish both the body and the intellect. But the true gravitational pull of Flou was the demographic it attracted and the soundscape that enveloped them.
The descriptions of the crowd in the source material are cinematic. This wasn't a homogeneous group. You had this incredibly eclectic, friction-heavy mix.
University students arguing with tenured professors. Theater actors seeking refuge after a performance.
Poets, musicians, and the counterculture youth of the city, affectionately referred to as freaks, all forced into proximity in this dimly lit, mirrored room.
The source provides a highly evocative, specific memory that captures the essence of the space perfectly.
Oh, the Angelakis story.
Yes. It describes a young Giannis Angelakis, who would eventually become one of the most vital and famous rock musicians in modern Greek history. Sitting quietly in a corner of Flou, sipping a whiskey, and deeply engrossed in reading a book by the avant-garde Russian film director Andrei Tarkovsky.
That is such a spectacularly specific image. Reading dense, philosophical Russian cinema theory in a smoky dive bar while rock music blares.
And the music.
Right. The music at Flou wasn't background ambiance to facilitate conversation. It was an active, commanding presence in the room. They played Nick Cave, Tom Waits, the Velvet Underground.
Kartachakis used a phrase to describe the effect of the music that is brilliantly descriptive. He said that when they played a track, like the Rolling Stones, like a Rolling Stone, a sonic blanket would physically fall over the room.
A sonic blanket. I love that. It describes exactly how the right song at the right volume in a confined space can physically suppress the ambient noise and unify the consciousness of everyone present.
It really does.
He also mentioned that whenever Nina Simone's Feeling Good came over the speakers, an entirely different phenomenon occurred.
The chatter wouldn't just be suppressed.
It would voluntarily cease. People would actually stop talking to their friends just to collectively absorb what he called this small human anthem.
And then deep in the early hours of the morning when the energy shifted, they would spin as time goes by from the Casablanca soundtrack.
It was a highly curated emotional architecture. They were blending alcohol, cinema, literature, and music to create a localized reality.
But we shouldn't overly romanticize it as a serene salon of intellectuals.
No, definitely not.
It was a late-night bar in a gritty urban center, and the reality of that environment was often fraught with danger.
Yeah, the sources have some absolutely wild, almost unbelievable anecdotes about what it actually took to keep the doors of a place like Flou open in the 1980s.
Operating a countercultural space often puts you at odds with the darker elements of the street.
Exactly. The source details a running conflict with what it describes as a lumpen gang. And to clarify that term for our listeners, we're talking about the lumpen proletariat, the deeply marginalized, disenfranchised, often volatile groups operating on the absolute edges of the urban economy.
Right. This specific gang was led by a local lottery ticket seller who went by the spectacular street name Tarzan.
Tarzan. And his associates began actively harassing the bar, creating a highly intimidating, physically dangerous perimeter outside the entrance. It threatened the very existence of the sanctuary.
So how do these intellectual, music-loving bar owners respond?
They don't just call the police. Kartachakis and Phokas, driven by sheer anxiety and a desperate need to protect their livelihood, secretly enroll in martial arts classes.
They literally start learning karate.
It is a remarkably pragmatic, if somewhat desperate, response to urban gang harassment.
And it pays off in a scene straight out of a low-budget action movie.
Tell me about it.
The gang shows up one night, drunk, aggressive, looking for a physical confrontation. The owners, pushed to the brink, rush out the door and strike these aggressive, highly stylized taekwondo defensive poses.
That's hilarious.
And the gang is so entirely bewildered and freaked out by this sudden, coordinated martial arts display that they simply turn around and run away.
It sounds absurd in hindsight, but it underscores a very real vulnerability. And they face threats that were far more sinister than street brawls.
Yes. In the very first year of operation, Flou was targeted by an arsonist.
And it wasn't random vandalism, it was a rival bar owner.
Yeah.
A man who operated a much seedier traditional establishment nearby, and who was infuriated by how Flou was altering the social dynamics and the clientele of the neighborhood.
He literally took a fuse, soaked it in flammable liquid, and attempted to burn the building to the ground.
He viewed their cultural innovation as a direct economic threat, and his response was attempted destruction. It highlights the friction of urban evolution.
But wait, let me pause and ask you something about this dynamic. We hear stories like this about legendary local bars in every major city, and people talk about them with this fierce, almost religious reverence.
They do.
Why do you think a place like Flou, a cramped room with salvaged mirrors, the exact same creaky wooden chairs for 40 years, a place where you literally have to fend off arsonists and street gangs commands, vastly more emotional loyalty than a modern multi-million-dollar club with perfect acoustics, laser lights, and VIP bottle service?
Well, because the modern mega club and the neighborhood dive bar operate on entirely different social paradigms.
How so?
The modern club is a transactional space. You exchange currency for a highly manufactured, fleeting aesthetic experience, or to signal your social status.
Okay.
A space like Flou was a relational space. The patrons didn't view it as a business. They viewed it as a living, breathing organism. It functioned as the communal living room for an entire generation of the city.
The communal living room.
Exactly. The source material explicitly highlights this. Romances were kindled in those booths. Marriages resulted from conversations that started at that bar.
Oh.
Kartachakis recalled a moment where a young woman approached him and revealed that her own parents had met in that exact room decades prior.
That's incredible.
When you keep the physical environment consistent, the same salvaged mirrors, the same custom tables, you provide a blank canvas for human memory. The memories layer on top of each other, year after year.
The bar becomes a sanctuary of continuity in an urban landscape that is otherwise defined by relentless, chaotic change.
Which makes the final chapter of this specific story incredibly heavy. Because we have to look at the street today. We are transitioning from the golden, smoky, chaotic era of the 1980s and 90s into the harsh, hyper-commercialized, unsentimental realities of the 2020s.
The erosion of Flou's dominance was gradual. The source identifies a significant cultural shift in the 1990s.
Right, the opening of Milos.
Yes, Milos was a massive, innovative entertainment complex established in a different part of the city.
Because of its scale and novelty, it naturally began to siphon massive amounts of energy and crowds away from the dense city center and away from Nikiforos Phokas Street.
Dimitris Phloukas actually departed the business around 1994, relocating to Athens. Michaelis Kardachakis remained.
He held the line.
He did, and the venue evolved, pivoting to become an even more entrenched hangout for the theatrical and cinematic crowd. It survived, but the broader economic and cultural tides of the city were shifting against it.
And the final fatal blow wasn't a decline in popularity, it was real estate.
In May of 2020, after nearly 40 years of continuous operation, the heirs who owned the physical building made a purely economic decision.
They no longer wanted the hassle of leasing out individual floors to small businesses. They sold the entire multi-story structure to a group of Israeli real estate investors.
The intent of the new owners was clear-gut the interior, erase the history, and convert the building into a highly profitable boutique hotel.
And the cruelty of the timing is staggering. Kardachakis and the staff had planned a massive 3-day farewell party for May of 2020.
A chance for generations of patrons to come back, drink one last whiskey, and say goodbye to the mirrors and the space that held so much of their youth.
But then, the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe. National lockdowns were enforced. The farewell party was canceled.
After 40 years of noise, of sonic blankets and human anthems, Flou didn't go out with a roar.
It ended in total silence. The heavy red door was locked, and it simply never opened again.
It is a profoundly melancholic end to a vibrant, defiant history. And crucially, the source material emphasizes that the fate of Flou is not an isolated incident.
Right. It is a microcosm of a massive, systematic architectural and functional transformation occurring across the entirety of Nikiforos Phokas Street today.
The street is undergoing rapid, aggressive gentrification. The historic, culturally significant residential buildings, the places where families like the Lascaridis once lived, are systematically being purchased, gutted, and converted into tourist accommodations.
The source cites a very specific, tangible example to illustrate this trend. The building at Nikiforos Phokas 3. This is a preserved, aesthetically significant 4-story residential building.
Yes, recently the municipality's building service officially granted a permit to a corporate entity named W Focus Suites Ike.
The permit allows them to fundamentally change the building's use, transforming it from a residential space into a 3-star hotel.
We are witnessing the rapid, relentless conversion of long-term residential habitats and localized cultural hubs into short-term, transient commercial zones.
And this brings up a really poignant, almost angry quote from the source material by Giannis Stefanidis, ironically, the founder of the Milos venue that originally pulled crowds away from Flou.
He laments this modern trend heavily. He argues that Greek cities, and perhaps modern cities in general, suffer from a severe, damaging lack of continuity.
His argument is that municipal planners fail to comprehend the true value of these spaces. These old hangouts, these dive bars, these neighborhood cafes, they aren't merely commercial enterprises generating tax revenue.
They are the culture. They are the physical manifestations of the city's civilization.
When you erase them in favor of sanitized, profitable spaces, you are effectively erasing the soul of the city.
Okay, hold on, though. Let me push back on this, because while it absolutely breaks my heart that Flou closed, are we being a little overly romantic here?
What do you mean?
Isn't a city street, by its very definition, a living, evolving organism? Look at the entire timeline we've discussed today. The era of Emperor Phokas ended violently. The era of the ancient Macedonian port ended and was paved over by the Romans.
Right.
The era of residential families ended in the crushing rubble of a 1978 earthquake. Isn't a modern, clean boutique hotel just the next logical layer of the pentimenti? Why is a hotel inherently worse than a Byzantine dock?
That is a highly rigorous, objective historical perspective, and you are correct. The street itself will physically survive this era, just as it survived the Arab sack by Leo of Tripoli and the seismic devastation of the earthquake.
Yeah, Full doesn't care.
But the specific melancholy that Stefanidis points out regarding this current transition is rooted in the fundamental shift of the street's function.
The function.
Yes. For thousands of years, regardless of what empire was in charge, whether it was functioning as a bustling port, a dense residential block, or a gritty hub of counterculture, the street was a local, lived-in space.
It was a habitat.
It was a place where the permanent residents of Thessaloniki forged their daily realities, suffered their tragedies, built their families, and created a highly localized, fiercely protected culture.
I see.
The shift toward boutique hotels and short-term rentals fundamentally alters that dynamic. It transforms the street into a transient space.
Because the individuals occupying those newly renovated rooms are there for 3 days and then they leave.
Exactly. They do not form a community. They do not build marriages in the lobby. They do not learn martial arts to protect the neighborhood.
They're there to consume the aesthetic of the city without contributing to its underlying social fabric.
The physical street survives, yes, but its function for the local people is hollowed out. It ceases to be a living habitat and becomes a museum of itself.
Wow. A museum of itself. That is a brilliant, entirely devastating way to frame it. And it really brings us to the end of our journey down this incredibly dense, fascinating street.
Geographically, Nikiforos Phokas is just a narrow corridor of asphalt. But temporally, it contains an overwhelming multitude of human experiences.
We started with a terrifying ascetic emperor sleeping on a bloody animal skin, a master tactician who conquered the East but couldn't survive the politics of his own bedroom.
We walked over the ancient soil where 22,000 citizens were dragged away into slavery by a renegade fleet, a trauma so deep the city named the street as a protective spell.
We stood in the silent, terrifying aftermath of a collapsing 8-story building, tracing the impossible random string of mundane choices, a canceled TV show, a party that determined whether a family lived or died.
And we spent 40 years behind a heavy red door, surrounded by salvaged mirrors, listening to Nick Cave, and watching a culture build itself from the ruins.
All of that extreme human suffering, profound joy, and chaotic chance, compacted and layered on top of each other over a few hundred meters of space.
It leaves me with a lingering, slightly haunting question for you, the listener, to mull over as you walk through your own city today. As these historic buildings, these old residential blocks, and these legendary dive bars where generations fell in love are quietly gutted.
As they are transformed into pristine, quiet, perfectly manicured hotel rooms for temporary visitors.
What happens to the ghosts of the street? Does the street finally lose its own story when the people sleeping there change every 3 days? Or is the street simply holding its breath, patiently absorbing this quiet commercial period, just waiting for the next great chaotic era of history to bleed through the paint?
It'll completely change how you view the closed doors and renovated facades in your own neighborhood.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up today's journey, we want to sign off by explicitly reminding you, exactly as we promised at the start.
Remember, this deep dive is part of the podcast. The street has its own story, or in Greek, O dromos ascetic ton historia, provided by the podcaster Giannis Stefanidis.
Thank you so much for exploring the deep, invisible layers of time with us today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.